Good morning. Welcome everyone to Saturday. It's the party day, right? We have our gala tonight, our auction tonight, but we have a very interesting group of speakers this morning. Before we get started with our panel, which is titled the Meat/Camera Grading Panel, I had a lot of questions and about meat, camera grading, different technologies, USDA. We've thrown a lot of different ideas at you, and I think maybe we need some clarification on what bin goes where when it comes to meat grading cameras, USDA remote grading, taking pictures with your cell phone, and where each fits in. So I'm going to give you just maybe a little bit of structure, and then I'll call up our panelists. So I'm going to start with USDA, the remote grading. The remote grading is with your cell phone pictures, right? But it can also encompass your meat grading cameras like the MIJ and MEQ. You don't need to have an MIJ or MEQ to do remote grading, but it's with cameras, right? So if you get approval through USDA to do remote grading at your plant, then all you need is a picture. You don't necessarily need a camera. And that is going to give you a grade through the USDA. And then you can send on that information to us if need be. Now, the next kind of realm that maybe we'll talk about and is kind of more on the genomic evaluation side for me is what we have been receiving is pictures from the grading cameras. I know that can be very confusing, but when I talk about grading cameras, we're talking about the E+V, the MIJ, coming online, the MEQ, the Master Beef was in there for a while as well. So those are grading cameras, and not all of them are approved by the USDA, but they have been used by y'all to understand the grading variation within Wagyu. Now, all of you know that USDA only goes up to a point, right? So to get that variation into our genomic evaluation, we need to utilize those cameras. So those cameras are more geared towards getting that data to you for those genomic evaluation points, or for you guys to understand percent IMF, your REA, kind of what's going on in that realm. So the only overlap there is that if you take a picture with an MIJ, you can send that picture into USDA, and you can send the data into me, if that makes sense, hopefully. I think that's it. I think taking pictures with just your cell phone camera, that's USDA. The AI meat grading cameras are kind of its own other deal that the USDA is kind of in, kind of not. All right. If you have any further questions on that, we can talk a bit more at the panel right now, or you can find me afterwards if you need more clarification. But I would like to call up our panelists now. We have Jenny Tweedy, Andy Pendergrass, and Dan Gehno, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Yeah. Hold on. We'll grab them up here. Give a sec. Yeah, all the mics are on.
Mics are on.
Yeah, should be. All right. We do have a question already from Paul. If someone wants to run him a mic real quick. Sorry.
Yeah, I spoke to the USDA guys the other day when they were here, and one of the other options is state level USDA, and they can also possibly do the remote grading as well. But there's very limited facilities within each state. Like Pennsylvania, there's 3 in the whole state. But that option's available to actually get remote grading done as well.
Yeah, so you're talking about the inspected facilities? Yeah, so that's a different level. There's USDA inspected facilities, state inspected facilities, and then on top of that, if you want USDA grading, you'd have to go a step further.
Right, and
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge for us smaller producers is getting that carcass data back to you. And I think I would really love for the Wagyu Association to kind of hopefully come up with a standard that we can project that out to everybody, especially the smaller producers, that says, okay, here's exactly what we need, here's how it's got to be done, and especially for us custom butcher producers. And in our discussion yesterday, the ability to take a picture, from what I understand, and send that directly into you is still not.
No. It only exists if you have one of the grading cameras.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And the one lady yesterday had the questions about how do we turn in that data to you, and I think this explanation this morning, in conjunction with, I'm not sure how deep the panel's going to go into any of this about actually.
They know about these cameras pretty well. Yeah.
Right, but actually getting the data to you. So right now, the understanding that I have is that the MEQ or any of the other cameras, we can turn that data into you. It's not going to go through the USDA or anything. Nope. And now we can start getting carcass data into.
Yep. If you want to submit carcass data, all that I really need is that animal to be semi-registered with us, have some sort of animal connected to him, either himself be registered or his parents be registered. And we have a genomic piece that connects him to a registered animal, and then just have that carcass data connected to that animal. But that is just the piece.
Right, and it also includes the percentage as well. It's not just full blood. Yeah,
we can take carcass data from 50 all the way up. Right. A lot of carcass data. I mean, the bulk of animals that come in large swaths are F1s, and we're able to produce EPDs from those.
Right, and I just want to make sure the whole association, especially the smaller producers, understood that.
Yeah, and if anyone has further questions on that, find me, or you can email me, and I'll get back to you. I'm not too good on the phone, but I get email back pretty quickly.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, thank you. We're gonna get started with our panel. I'm gonna have everyone introduce themselves and kind of their background, and maybe the information they have regarding meat grading, how they got started in this area.
I got told to start, so I will. Dan Gehno. I've been with AgriBeef about 5 years. My background, I grew up in ranching with my family, and then have a degree from Utah State in animal science and another one from Texas A&M in meat science, and then spent several years at Cargill where I started. And I took over grading there. And so I've been in beef grading in some form for 15 plus years now. I don't know how long it's been really, but it's been a while. And so I've been working with the camera systems all that time. And so I spent a lot of time just around it in general, and then also work with NCBA on their grading advisory committee. So I sit on their grading advisory committee.
Hi, my name is Tweedy, and I'm the Vice President of Sugar Mountain Livestock. And we have two different Wagyu brands. We've got Winterfrost American Wagyu beef, which is predominantly Angus Wagyu cross. And then we also have Winterfrost, which is a predominantly Jersey cross animal. And, over the past 10 years of, grading carcasses within those programs, we've kind of done a skew of all of the things. We started with, having a third party come in, and we gave them BMS scorecards and they would put together grading data. And then we kind of walked into more sophisticated systems using the E+V camera. We've also tested the MIJ, the Master Beef. We do currently use the MEQ camera as well. So done a little bit of everything as far as the grading data. We use it for two different use cases, really. It's just the use case of being able to make the quality grade call to be able to take out to the consumer. But, we've also participated in programs with the American Wagyu Association and submitting data back to the association. So, I'd welcome any questions about kind of tangibly how you do that as well.
Morning, everyone. Andy Pendergrass, VP of Supply Chain and Cattle Operations for RC Ranch. We are a vertical cattle and beef operation based out of Houston, Texas. We raise full-blood cattle to produce really high quality bulls for our supply chain for commercial feeder calves that feed our box beef program that is distributed across the country and in food service and quite a few major retailers as well. Going back to the early portion of my career when I got to use I think we called it one of the original MIJ cameras when there were only 2 in the country, and a big 30-pound clunky machine that was absolutely terrible to use, all the way to the newer MIJ camera and MEQ camera. We've kind of utilized all of those in our program, and just really happy to be here. We turn in a lot of information to Hannah and the association every year. Everything gets graded via camera in our program. So anything that we can share that's helpful to any of you, we're happy to share.
Awesome. I'm going to open it up for questions first, but I do have a swath of questions. All right, I might start with kind of maybe I wasn't around when these cameras first got started. So my question is, what was the biggest hurdle to really get these cameras implemented? Are you still having hurdles? And what do you see as solutions for those? In different kind of levels of production.
Well, since I introduced myself first, do you want to start down there?
Andy?
Oh man, we were enjoying you going first. We like that. It's definitely gotten easier as time has progressed. I know many of us have difficulties finding the right packer that works for us. There are only so many smaller packers to go around, especially quality packers. There are a lot of people in this room that are harvesting 10 head or less on a monthly basis, and that's the bulk of our membership, I would wager. But that's where so much is happening in this breed. That's what's great about our breed. We're kind of a grassroots organization that reaches all the way to the consumer, and we all struggle with finding the right facility to harvest our cattle and getting access to their locker, to our carcasses to get that information. But it seems like more and more those guys are being more open, being a bit more transparent, letting those of you who are doing this on a regular basis actually come back and get photos of your carcasses and get more information. I think too, as the MIJ and MEQ, you'll hear me talk about them predominantly because that's what I've actually used. They've made it much easier. The cameras themselves are using an iPhone, not that 30-pound clunky box that I used to use. And that's definitely increased speed and efficiency and made it a lot easier to allow the packer to allow you to go back there and actually take the images and collect the information that you need.
I guess I'll kind of speak to all the different devices. As far as the E+V, I guess really the hurdle would just be access. At the end of the day, access to that technology, you really have to be at a relatively sizable packing operation. So, for the majority of the membership, that's not going to be an option. As far as the MIJ, I think that's a wonderful technology. My one thing that I would really advise anyone using that technology is find a trained technician to guide you. Just to make sure that you're taking the best image possible so that you can get that data. What I really like about the MIJ in comparison to like an E+V camera is you're getting additional traits like fineness. So it's giving you more granular data. The E+V camera is really trained on Angus populations, and it goes to the USDA scale and it does go above, but it doesn't necessarily, if you're looking for extreme marbling, I don't know that there's going to be a huge line of delineation once you get above USDA prime and kind of in that thousands benchmark, which would be well above prime. So that MIJ camera really does provide that for people. So I like the granularity of that technology. What I like the best about the MEQ camera is operator access. You don't have to be a trained technician. Although, I don't know. I don't see any hurdles with the MEQ, but I think the MIJ's great data is just, it's a still image, so you need to make sure that you understand how to operate that technology.
I guess I'll go back a little further. When this all started, we started with the RMS system, which was the most clunky of all of them. It took 2 hands to run, and you kind of set it like this, and it was a pain in the butt. And so that would have been like early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. And then we went into what we call the E+V system, which would now be known as the Morel system. So if you see either of those, it's the same system. So we went to that. And we're in that particular one, when we started running that, the biggest hurdle was operator error, I think. And then getting the USDA bought into using it. And so the USDA originally said, well, cattle only go up to a marbling score 999, which would be like an abundant, a moderately abundant 99, right? And so there was a cap put there. And it took years for us to get them to move, the USDA, to move that cap up 2 more marbling scores. And I think they talked about moving it 2 more beyond that, and so opening it even more now. Even the Angus Association, which I know we're not here to talk about Angus, but even they're starting to see ones that are hitting the upper end of what's available. And so that was one of the hurdles, was just getting the USDA and getting the people bought into using it. We've gone through several iterations of that camera. We're now on, I think, the 4th or 5th generation. I know I've put in at least 4 different generations of that camera in different plants, and so of the Morel camera. And so each one of those generations makes it a little bit more effective in its and more consistent in its performance. I think I have to agree that the MEQ, when we've used it, it's pretty intuitive. I mean, I think most of us are addicted enough to our cell phones that we can use a camera cell phone pretty quickly and figure out how to use it. And so everybody that I've put in front of that one and said, I mean, I've had everybody try it at our facilities, and they all can do it. I can't put everybody on an E+V camera. And so there's a lot of operator hurdles that come there. The one hurdle I will say with MEQ that needs to be addressed, that we'll have to address as an industry individually and maybe collectively, is there's not a controlled lighting source, and that does make a difference. With the E+V or Morel camera, it sits over and it's controlled, basically darkens the image, and then they control how much light is shot when the image is taken. With the MEQ, because it's a live feed, the lighting source is relying on natural lighting, the lighting on this grade stand. And so if you're really well lit in an area that creates glare, you can get glare off of the ribeye. And so we've got ways to address that. It's not an end of the world thing. That's probably the only hurdle I can see with them, though, is just controlling that. But
Yeah, I've been around all the different cameras, and they're different but the same, for sure. That E+V is huge, and then the MIJ is a little bit more of what you guys have seen. And then I don't know if any of you have seen the MEQ. There was a video of it, but it does use video technology, right? So we kind of maybe talked on it a little bit, but there's differences in cameras, right? And the cameras might be a little different in between themselves. But we also know that there's differences between USDA graders. So my main question to you guys is, do you think that the difference between USDA graders is kind of what we're seeing with the difference between cameras?
I'll start with that one.
Okay.
I would tell you this. I don't know if this is going to answer your question, is if I took the difference, I'll go back to when we started, and I'm going to use my hands, so if you can follow along. If you can't, come ask me later, and I'll draw it on a piece of paper, I guess. But when we first started with the E+V camera, we were taking the camera images, and we didn't tell the graders we were taking camera images, and we'd follow their call lines. And this is just on the choice line, so it would be 400 or a small 0. And so we would get guys that their choice line would be at small 40 down to slight 60. I mean, it was like 100 point gap between graders. And this was standard. It was just happening. And then they started getting the camera calls, and all of a sudden their gap shrunk. Because then they were like, oh, there's something that's aligning us. And so what we find is, and we fight this with the USDA a little bit, and we have for 20 years, and we probably will for the next 20, but we find that there is infinitely more difference between two graders than between two cameras. And the reason is the cameras don't ever come in hungover. The cameras, not the graders do. The USDA is gone, so I can say that now. No, they could sit right there. I'd still say it to them. The cameras are the same, right? They're functioning the same. There are components that we have to replace and things we have to maintain. The biggest difference, like I said, we see between cameras tends to be between operator. Now, when we started down this road, and this goes to some of the stuff we're working on with grading advisory, one of the issues is the USDA wanted to have a gold standard grading group. It's a group of supervisors throughout the country that are going to be the call, right? They're the ones that are going to call what this really is. And we're trying to compare a camera to them. Well, we did that with the original E+V, and then 20 years later, we start doing it with upgrades of E+V and MEQ and MIJ, and those guys are all gone from 20 years ago. They're all retired. Yeah. They're all, some are beyond retired. We won't, but they're all not there. And so they went and got 10 new gold panelists and said, this is the same data as those guys. And it's not. And it's not the same cattle. The population 20 years ago looked different, significantly different. And so we see a lot of that variation. So we were trying to align the system that's pretty sophisticated against people's calls. And so I think a lot of our difference in the cameras came from that, is that we're trying to go back to a human call. And we fought that and tried to figure out how can we build a gold standard that we can really compare against that standard, and we don't have a good solution yet. But I think that does cause a lot of the difference, is that human error. So that was a long-winded answer. I apologize.
It was very good.
No, we appreciate it. No, I would say I'd echo that sentiment. I think operator is one of the things that, could potentially sway your outcomes. I think I'm going to kind of twist this answer a little bit. I think one opportunity we might have as an association trying to collect uniform data and now having all of these different technologies, we probably need to do some baselining even just between the technologies. Hannah can talk to this a little bit as far as like the genetic evaluation part of it. If you're using one technology in a contemporary group, you're still able to kind of rank those animals. But at the same rate, I think there's an opportunity for the association, now that we have all these different options, to look at the differences between the calls. Because, with the genetic evaluation, you can kind of stick with one technology and you're still going to be able to get data that shows performance. But when you're going out to your consumer and trying to market something based off of a grading technology, there might be some differences. So I think that I'm kind of going to throw that back on the association. I think we should probably look at some committees around that going into the future, because, as beef marketers too, we need to be able to all kind of speak the same language.
Great points. Really great points. Don't know how to follow that up really well. But, the human aspect is a really big one. To Dan's original point, I've also been in plants where someone's coming down from upstairs to yell at graders on the floor because they're not real happy with what's happening down there. And you see variations. Maybe someone had a bad day. Maybe one person has a tendency to over or undershoot versus the person in front or behind him. Those things happen. I think there's a tendency for some of us that see a lot of really heavy marbling carcasses, and we may have been looking at them for a long time. We have a lot of confidence in our own eye, but we have a tendency to maybe get a little bit snowblind when you're looking at all that marbling and so many carcasses. As it pertains to consistency, we've probably had the most success with an MEQ camera from person to person. I've taken an MEQ camera, or actually one myself, given another one to a person that doesn't speak English, teach them how to run it, and we did this the first time I ever touched an MEQ camera, but did 150 carcasses in a line. And when we got to the end, went back with an MIJ and did the same procedure, and found a lot more tightly grouped data with the MEQ, a lot more consistency doing it that way. That's not to say that I necessarily prefer the MEQ over the MIJ, but I think the most important thing until, to Jenny's point, we have a little bit more standardization and we all collectively figure out what we want to use. The most important thing for you as a producer is to be consistent with the system that you use, so that all that data that you collect and all that data that you turn in, it's all on the same system. So we're comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. If the data that you're utilizing and turning in is from different systems or different people measuring it visually, you're leaving a lot of room for error, and that's where things get really sideways. So I really stress just whatever system you use, stick with it.
We have a question. Thank you, Jacob.
A question for you, Hannah.
Yeah.
We've taken over 50,000 MIJ images as a business in Australia, and we now have a heritability of marbling at about 70%. When we use the Osmeat system, which is like the USDA graders, our heritability drops to 45%. So we can only describe 45% of the variation as genetically controlled, and with the MIJ we can describe 70%. So we can massively increase our genetic gain compared with the human graders, which I suspect is the same situation with your USDA system. So my first question is, have you looked at the heritability of your three different options here? The E plus V is somewhat like an Osmeat system where the top grade now, depending on the full blood program, we have on average 40% go above that top grade, so they don't get delineated, they just get called that top grade. Some programs are well above 90%, so there's actually no variation in the calls, so the heritability goes down.
Yeah.
The other one for you guys to maybe discuss is there any interest in fineness of marbling in the American Wagyu industry? So in Japan, the BMS system is a 1 to 12 system. Once you hit 8, which is your 5 quality score, 8 to 12 is all 5 quality score, you have to have an equivalent of about 56% DMP on an MIJ. Once you get up to 12, the minimum is about 60, so it's only about 4%. All of those grades are delineated by fineness of marbling. So I'm unfamiliar with your other technologies, but is there an interest in having fineness of marbling as a trait?
We can all touch on it. Do you want me to? I'll just kind of speak generally. Yes, we're interested in fineness and marbling. There's no standard in the U.S., so they're not. So we're kind of going back and trying to create our own standard, right? I think these guys can talk a little bit more about fineness as well. And then your first question on heritability, we do see that, and that's just because, as Dan was saying, you're eliminating a lot of that environmental unknown, which is human to human, right? So if you all were here with Daniela yesterday, she showed our heritabilities per camera, and our E plus V is around 60. I think the MIJ is up there too at 50. And then just regular graders are down at the usual like 40%, which is usually what we see, right? So we're seeing the same trends, right? So kind of thinking what Dan is saying is, are the cameras the gold standard, and do we just need to go the other way around? That's maybe another question, but go ahead.
Yes, they are. No, to fineness of marbling, it's an interesting question because we see conflicting opinions. Because if you look at conventional cattle, non-Wagyu cattle, and we go to consumer preference, consumers actually, in the U.S. at least, tend to buy not as fine marbling because a little bit coarser marbling jumps out in the meat case to them. And so it's kind of one of those things where they walk by and they go, oh, look at that one. They don't have to get close to see it, if that makes sense. But that's at a smaller level of marbling, significantly smaller. We do have the capability in all three technologies to measure fineness. It's not as clean as maybe the MIJ's already developed fineness, but the data's there. I mean, what data we see from E plus V that's reported, there's probably 100 times that much data in the background that's available for us to look at. And so we can measure it, and it is something I think of interest because I think it drives that next level. I mean, to your point of what the Japanese system does, there's a reason it's there. It's because it creates a new differentiation level that allows you to bucket more tightly these groups of cattle into eating experiences.
Joe, you have a good call out. I mean, just think about the development of the different cameras, and obviously the MIJ. It was developed to grade animals of, high marbling percentages. So I think there's some opportunity with the other cameras. And, again, as the association, I think that's something we should be looking into. But as far as calling clear lines of delineation, that was in marbling and then also in fineness. That's what that technology has continued to develop around. So I would say just looking at the three technologies, when we're trying to evaluate for genetic progress or that kind of granularity in our details, that's obviously going to be the camera that should be leaned on. So that's really my only comment on that.
I think they covered that really well. Don't really have a lot to add. However, something that's kind of interesting for us that we've seen that we've not really dove deep into, but we have kind of noticed some trends in a lot of the images that we take, that our finer marbling carcasses also tend to be the most proportional throughout in terms of where all the marbling is located. I'm sure most of us in the room have had carcasses where a lot of that marbling is grouped in maybe on one side of a ribeye or in the muscle or in different places. And we don't necessarily, I don't feel like as our program at RC Ranch, we've got a lot of data, but only have so much on marbling fineness to really use into our breeding program. I mean, we incorporate that, but I'd be interested to see if the dispersion of marbling and fineness, if there is any kind of correlation to those. Mm-hmm. As we dig deeper into fineness and start using it more here in the U.S. I think because Wagyu is so new here, a lot of us are still trying to figure out first which genetics do marble and then which genetics grow and then the combinations of those. But I'm excited for us as an industry here to start digging more into fineness and actually utilizing that as more of a selection trait, see where that takes us.
Yeah, and we do know fineness is heritable. We've seen it in research. So it's just something I think as an association I'm extremely interested about. I've reached out to universities for kind of some introductory research into the best way to measure it, I think, is what we're after right now. Do we have any more questions from the floor right now? Hold on real quick.
Is there any effort to get the human graders to start adopting the technology to use as a tool in their job?
We've pushed a lot.
Are they worried just about job numbers on the people employed on the floor, or is it because eventually that'll be an automated process? It's just a question of when.
Yeah.
So how do we flatten that curve?
Yeah.
I'm going to let these guys talk to it. Yep.
So the goal is by 2030, no graders will be out of the plants, and we'll go to a camera-based, technology-based, and that's plants over, I think it's all plants over 1,000 heads. So it's bigger plants, but that should trickle down as well. So that's the goal with the NCBA Grading Advisory Committee and the USDA. And what we're trying to do there is go to an audit-based system. So they'll get the images that we take, then they'll be able to audit those images. And so that would allow the graders in all plants it would basically say the plant's going to rely on the technology. We've approved, the USDA would say, we approve this technology. We've gone through the trial process and we believe in it. And then they can always have that repertoire of images to look back at and say they've done what they applied the grades accurately according to the standards, and it's done. So there is a timeline actually already put in place to get to that point. And I think our first plant will be going into that kind of system pretty soon. I don't know the exact date when that'll happen, but it should be pretty soon.
I think we should personally be very proud of the recent progress with the USDA. I mean, they've accredited 2 different technologies for marbling score calls within this year. And, you know, that's been a lot of urgency around adopting new technologies from the USDA. And I mean, it's great. Some of these groups that NCBA is putting together, they're putting together a yield group, they're putting together a marbling score call group. And, you know, it's not just people who are directly in that industry. I mean, they're bringing feeders in, they're bringing seed stock breeders in. So everyone's able to bring their perspective and have kind of the whole industry represented and giving feedback. So, you know, I've personally been really excited about how much progress they've had in the last year to 2 years.
I think they covered that pretty well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think when I first started, we were just starting to get it ramped up with the USDA, trying to get them to adopt these cameras and hear our plea. And we're all the way here now to remote grading. They've approved these cameras, and I think we're on the way for them to really adopt this sort of system. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
The thing I always I've pointed out to the USDA for a while now is we're not in beta testing on camera grading anymore. We're 20 years in. At some point, they've got to say, oh yeah, this works. You know, so I think the 2 guys that you had here the other day, Chad and Derek, have been probably the biggest supporters of moving forward and driving. So you guys I don't know what all they said. I hope they said good stuff, but they're really been the ones pushing that forward. So
For sure.
Well, and I'll also comment too, I mean, I think we should also thank Jerry and Hannah. I mean, they've been extremely involved with the USDA and keeping them informed on what our producers need. And, you know, like we've been calling out today, the need is the ability to call out higher marbled cattle. And there's been consistent line of communication from our staff with the USDA continuing to message that. So I think everyone should be really proud of what the association is doing as well.
Thanks, Jenny.
And what I'd just like to put forward is there are already MIJ images coming in, and they have the ability to measure the fineness. So I think it might be a missed opportunity if we don't get organized to start, you know, collating that data. It'd be a missed opportunity if we only do it later. So the sooner we can get that done, I think the better for all of us.
I think Dean, over there, right there, over there. One more question over there.
I have a couple of questions for you guys. We've used, through a third party, the MIJ carcass camera with frames, and we've noticed that just what you're saying on the lighting, they come back with different percentages, but the image is still there. And our customers, we can show them an image and not some grader going down the line, inspector saying whatever it is, because we have proof of what that image is. And so I think a lot of people are getting pretty worried about which camera to use. But anytime you have an image that you can prove to your customers over somebody giving you a report from the packing plant, and I'm sure you guys have realized this, but the one question I have noticed personally myself, and the camera we had used the frames. It wasn't a beaker for the lighting, but we found ourselves that if we get the speckled marbling, the really fine marbling, versus fine marbling all through the ribeye. But that speckled marbling is more tender, is what we've noticed, than even the little coarser marbling, which isn't coarse, but is that pretty much true? The finer the speckled marbling, the more tender you're finding with the meat?
I feel like I've been going first a lot, but I will keep doing that because. So I don't know that I've tested it, but from a meat science standpoint, it would be logical that you're creating more gaps between the muscle bundle groups by creating more fat that's going to render out and create gaps. And so when you take a bite, you're creating a more perception of tenderness there, if that makes sense, because you're creating more space between them. So I would assume that it is true. I haven't tested that necessarily. One of the things that gets really difficult in testing it is you could test it with slice shear, and there's a lot of variation that can happen there. You can test it with consumer panels, but or trained sensory panels. Most of our trained sensory panels, you bring in Wagyu, and they're like, everything's fantastic. It's all great because we've hit some critical threshold for them that it's just like it's difficult to get them to like really pick things apart and really give you. So we've done some testing with sensory panels or trained sensory panels, and they'll find small things, but they don't separate statistically as well as if you bring in conventional beef where there are really good ones and really bad ones. Does that make sense? It's kind of harder to separate. But I think the logic behind what you're saying makes a lot of sense from a meat science standpoint. So.
Well, we've even seen if it's 25% versus a 38%, they like the 25% to that finer particle and it's more tender, and with the flavor and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know that we've ever seen a true correlation between necessarily tenderness and fineness of marbling. I'd be intrigued to see if anything ever comes out of that. That'd be interesting to learn.
A lot of times when I look for this stuff in research articles, I have to Google Translate from Japanese to English. So I might have to go through some Japanese articles. I bet you there's some out there. There probably is. Yeah.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
It stands to reason, just as Dan was saying, if you've got good even distribution, just the presence of more fat, naturally you've got less resistance in the bite and the chew that would increase the mouthfeel and the tenderness of a steak. But I'd love to, if anyone has any information on that, I'd love to know.
One of the things I'd say there is, and I don't know if this happens, I don't know how but it would be interesting to see in a laboratory setting because nobody would get to see what the fineness was before they cook the steak. Because I can tell you if I'm looking at a beautiful one that's fine and then one that's not, I'm going to be like, well, that one was better. I know.
Preconceived
I
notion.
I could tell. And so there is some of that. And so, but it would be interesting to look through some articles. I'll have to get my Google Translate going too, I guess.
Yeah. AI is powerful in multiple ways. Yeah, I think it would be also very interesting to do just pure laboratory setting, just to kind of see what it's throwing. I think we have one back there.
And I've got a question here.
Kyle?
So we've done some of this at the University of Hawaii on several thousand carcasses, but on some of the finer marbling carcasses, there's also a sense of reason there's more sheets of insoluble collagen, right? And then age is a big factor too. So as you take those cows from 28 to 32 months and push them towards 40, the same genetics may express really, really differently in terms of Warner Bratzler and sensory panel, where you're not going to get anything on shear force.
Yep.
If you're using the slice, right?
Yep.
Because of the threshold of that thing having the blade activity having gone across the plane. So it's a complex issue. So in some ways, if you're selecting for extreme marble fineness, you're actually applying some negative selection pressure towards tenderness, right?
Yep.
But marbling, because of the lubrication factor and some of those, could also give you the perception or the sensory that it was tender, right? So it's kind of a difficult thing to pull apart.
Complex traits and they're all genetically correlated, right? So if you pull on one, the other one's it's probably gonna change. Any other comments on that?
No, I think he said it well.
Perfect. Question?
There's an extra seat up here.
Just some comments on the Australian Wagyu Association fineness trait. The one presently published is the original fineness trait, which is defined as the number of small marbling particles, and sorry, I was speaking in centimetres rather than inches, but it's defined as the number of small marbling particles that are smaller than half a square centimetre per square centimetre of ribeye. People might be surprised that the Australian Wagyu Association haven't put a fineness phenotype into their analysis for 5 years. And that's because when the original mirror type camera, the 30-pound version that we all used back when we were young, was discontinued, and the MIJ 30 came out, and then MIJ actually started reporting a different fineness trait, and that fineness trait is called New Fineness Index 2, and the definition of that trait is the circumference of all of the marbling particles added together divided by the ribeye area. So it's actually quite highly correlated with marbling itself. And the reason they've done that is that once you get above 30% DMP, you just don't actually have enough room to put, so you've got a negative correlation between marbling above 30% DMP and fineness. So it is a complex thing, but I think there's a huge opportunity for you to lead the pack if you look hard at this trait.
I hear you 100%, and that's the problem I had. I was looking into the NFI for when we first started getting cameras, and I just got a little wary of it because it changes and it's different between cameras and how they measure it's different. So I think majorly is I'm trying to find a standard that the association backs with data. I think that's the main thing. Anyone else have comments on that? All right. Any other questions? Question? Right here. We've got about 5-10 more minutes, so get them out now.
So it sounds like when we talk about everything that's going on, it's, and I'm fairly new to all this, so it sounds way complicated. And there's different terms like this DMP, IMF, BMS. And as I look at different websites of the companies and stuff that are around here, it seems like some companies are coming up with their own grading systems. People are using different names and different terms. Are we confusing the consumer as to what we're trying to accomplish and what we're doing? It's the amount of fat, right, in the meat. So what are we doing as an association to kind of educate the consumer and be consistent across, this breed, that we're communicating what we're trying to accomplish?
I can talk on association, but I want these guys to go. They're up here. I'm going to start with Andy now.
Oh, gosh. Whoa, there's a lot to break down there. We're out in the market on a daily basis. Our program's really active in food service, and this is the first place that we get a lot of this criticism as a breed from chefs and from the decision makers, from hospitality groups, whoever they may be. Because the USDA system, when it was created for Select Choice Prime and those other grades that exist within it, they never anticipated the level of marbling that we have in these cattle. And so it's created a big challenge out in the market. We have chefs ask us all the time, this program has this naming convention, this program has this naming convention. We've all kind of done our own thing. And it's created a ton of confusion. One of the common questions we get from a chef when one of our sales guys goes into that restaurant to sell him or to do whatever they're going to visit on, they get that question: how does your product, this quality grade that you've given this product in your program, compare to these others? Because, one thing that Australians have done really well is setting up their grading program. That's one great advantage that their product has in our market, is that when a chef orders that product from their sales rep, whether they be Beneke, Cisco, US Foods, whatever, they get to buy it by a third-party grade that's on that box. And that's one of the biggest disadvantages that Wagyu in general has out in the market, because we don't have a standardization on what the grades are. It's harming us as a whole, because it's leaving a lot of chefs and retail consumers kind of scratching their heads saying, you know, these guys call it X, Y, Z, reserve, platinum, gold, 10 to 20%, and they just want to purchase a product and know that it's going to look very similar every time they order it, and every time they open that box when it shows up into the restaurant. They just want to know that every time it comes in, it's going to be consistent. So we've got a lot of work to do on that.
It's the main trait that we're selling on, and we can't even define it or be consistent as to how to measure it.
That's right. It's a huge challenge. And I think in addition to that, what we've got to do is we've also got to establish some benchmarks on what minimum quality grades we really want to push out there into the market. I know that was something that the association was trying to do with the Authentic Wagyu program, trying to create kind of a benchmark or a baseline at minimum. Because there's a lot of Wagyu product out there in the market that it's not very heavily marbled, and those are some things we have to address as well. And we get that feedback from chefs from time to time as it pertains to Wagyu in general. You know, we've done some things internally within our program. You know, none of us is batting 1,000 on a certain number ahead. Once you hit a certain point, you get a dud here and there. And for us personally, we do something different with that product to ensure that, one, it doesn't drag down our brand or Wagyu as a whole. But I think that's something we've got to spend a lot of time on as a group, everyone in this room, and potentially some smart people outside the room, whether they be chefs or food service distribution experts, to help us find alignment on how to move forward. But
I think that's kind of a three-pronged question, because, so first question was, you know, everyone has their own internal grading system, and, you know, that's really out of necessity. The USDA has not given us the tools at the time that these brands were developed to go out and appropriately grade them to the American consumer, right? So these cattle have a lot of cost, and those that have, you know, higher marbling scores, you have to be able to market that to be able to get that, you know, value out of that animal or your return on your investment. So, you know, that was really kind of, I think, the function of it, right, is, you know, these brands have to come out and they have to be able to brand and market their product. And, you know, it's benchmarked, most of them, against a BMS score, just because, you know, that's what people think of when they think of Wagyu cattle. So, yes, it's inconsistent, but it's kind of been on the onus of the brands on how they want to market their cattle. The second thing is, you know, what can the association do? And, you know, I'd also like to kind of flip it back to what has the association done? You know, I think the Authentic Wagyu program is wonderful for those that are trying to market their animals and reach that, get that value out of them, because it does have a minimum threshold as far as the quality grade. I mean, Sheila is a great testament to this. And, you know, the animals do have to qualify, and that's a tool that the association has created for their membership to be able to go out and market their cattle and to have a set of standards. So, you know, it's still in its infancy, but at least it's a tool that has been produced from the association to aid people in gaining the revenue per head out of their animals. What can the association do? There's still a lot of work to be done, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity for doing some benchmark studies between the technologies against USDA grades and BMS scores, and understand the correlations between these technologies. So there's still work to be done, but, you know, we're so much further ahead than we used to be, but we're still continuing to make progress.
I'm still collecting my thoughts. So I actually kind of disagree a little bit. So my fear is that when I go to a food service provider and they say, I want to know how this compares to someone else. What they're saying is, I want to be able to buy from someone else also. And what I'm saying is, no, let's make an agreement, let's make a partnership, let's make a long-term partnership here and work together. And I think that from a business standpoint, that's healthier for us from a business. Now, what they're wanting is a commodity product that they can just plug and play from anybody they want, and it's all going to be the same. And I think we run the risk of commoditizing a product that really we might not want to commoditize. We might want to make sure it stays as a premium product instead of staying at a commodity product. So I think the solutions that they were talking about as far as minimum level to be able to be considered Wagyu is a great step to say, hey, we're going to just set a standard and say, if you're not at least here, we can't call you Wagyu. Because I think I worry more about commoditizing. I look at you look at, 30 years ago, Angus was the premium thing, and now it's everywhere. You can buy it in every grocery store. You can buy it, and it's great. Angus has really done well, I guess, and CAB's done very well. But it is a commodity. It's no longer like the exception to the rule. It is the rule, and maybe that's where we want to go with Wagyu, but I'm not sure we do. So that's the part I'm concerned on. The other part I get concerned on is we talk an awful lot about marbling, and what I can tell you is that if you take a conventional animal that's a 900 marbling score and a Wagyu that's a 900 marbling score, and you put those through consumer panels, the consumer panels will pick the Wagyu every single time. And so I think we kind of do ourselves a disservice by trying to just fit into the program that was built for Angus and built for European breeds. And by doing that, we're saying we're just going to be a little bit better than them. We're just going to try to beat them at their own game. But we could really recreate the game to fit our cattle, these cattle. And I think that's probably, when we start talking about fineness, they're not talking about that at Angus Convention, I don't think. I don't go, and I'm not on a panel there, but I'm assuming they're not. When we start talking about buttery flavor, they're kind of, hey, don't talk about that too much because we'll get beat on that one. So the things that we can really, really trump those guys on. The example I've used for people is that if you go to play high school basketball, right? You're selected out of a group of 1,000 kids, right? Maybe, or whatever your high school is, to play on the team. And then maybe you get to go to college and you're selected out of a group of whatever. And then maybe you get to go to the NBA and you're selected out. By the time you get to the NBA, you're 1 out of 1,000,000, right? Or whatever the number of kids playing basketball is. We're trying to create NBA stuff, not high school basketball stuff. So let's quit playing high school basketball rules and let's figure out how we can build our own set. So that's my kind of. Yeah.
And the consumers understand what that system is and what it means versus, like you're saying, 1,000 score, and then if your DMS score is 6,
Yeah.
and you're I'm confused, you know what I'm saying? So, but I like what you're saying, that instead of playing in their game, because heck, even the processor that we use, which is a large processor, which one of the big names that was up there on day one uses that processor, they don't grade.
Yeah.
And so you can, if we have a way, like if it's authentic Wagyu, I don't understand the whole program just yet, but if we have a way of, you were even saying, sending in the photos, and then there'd be kind of a scale or something of our own. I was
Yeah.
just curious if that's what's being looked at, or
Yeah.
what direction we're trying to go.
Yeah, as Dan said, we're trying to create our own game. And you're fighting the USDA a little bit. You're fighting Angus a little bit, sorry, anyone, but you're fighting these big giants and kind of creating your own niche. And you guys are putting a lot of your foot forward, and we're working hard at the association to try to make something that's objective, standardized, and usable for you guys. And that sounds easy up here, but it is very, very hard.
Okay, I'll make one comment on that.
Go
One
ahead.
of the things that we've seen a benefit, not just in Wagyu, but in conventional cattle, is continuous data. The more continuous the data is, the better it is for folks like Hannah to use. And so if we give her buckets and say, this is prime, this is whatever, and that's all the data she gets, there's stuff she can do. She can work her geneticist magic, the voodoo. It's voodoo. They've got little dolls, little cow dolls. They stab with pins. I've seen
We're a
them.
coven. We're a coven.
Yeah. I have a brother that belongs to that group, so I'm good.
We get along very well.
Yeah. So the point is by creating something standard, to your point, that says, hey, we're all going to use marbling score, even if that's the number, whatever the number is. If we can create that continuous data set, then she can take that data and it becomes a lot more usable to them. We looked at it when we went to continuous data on grading in conventional cattle. Prime went from 2% to 12% over the next 10 years because all of a sudden the geneticists are able to do things they probably couldn't have done before. Computers help too, but but giving that data is better. So I think your point's valid. Is we have to have a standard. I don't know. I'm going to be candid. I don't think it's going to be you're going to go to every major Wagyu producer and say you're all going to now start selling under these brands, because we have our own brands and our own for a reason. First off, they weren't there, and so we had to create something. But now people know them, and so we're going to be hesitant to step back from that. But I think at least it gives you a baseline to say when a Wagyu comes into it, when something comes in labeled American Wagyu, we know it's going to meet this minimum threshold. And maybe there becomes different levels. I think you talk about full blood and purebreds. And so those different levels may have different standards, but it allows people to go in and say, hey, there is at least this, we have this confidence that it's going to at least fit this bucket.
Jenny and Andy, you guys want to talk on that? No? Good. Okay. We probably only have time for one more. Jerry?
I'm not really sure how to phrase this.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned that we're co-opting the name Wagyu and putting a minimum threshold on it because it's a breed. There are people who have made a very successful business with a lower level of Wagyu and have sold it, and that's their niche, right? So what I'm hearing is that we're gonna say, oh, it has to be XYZ, and if that's above what they are, then they're no longer allowed to call theirs Wagyu when they're marketing. I understand the need for a level of Wagyu for the consumer, and I've talked about that particular company hurting my reputation with the consumer because they go out and have that company's Wagyu and think it's not worth the price. I get that. I'm just a little concerned about us, how we're going to label that and co-opting the breed's name and making a standard for the. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I understand your question.
Go ahead.
I can't see you, but I.
Sorry, I'll step back. She's
Hi.
right there.
Okay. So I'll tell you, I met with the CAB folks years ago, and I sat down with them, and we had a conversation. And at the end of it, I told them that what I'd say here, and there's a reason why I'm saying this, but what I said was, you guys have done a really good job of becoming the standard in the industry. Now, don't screw it up for all of us. And the point is if they, as CAB, became this name of quality for conventional beef, if then all of a sudden they were like, oh, we're just going to let everything in, we're going to open up, we're going to cheat a little and start letting stuff in, someone has bad beef, that doesn't just hurt them. It hurts everybody because someone says, that's no longer good enough. That's not what I want. Beef's just not good anymore. And that would be my fear. I think you made that same point. I would agree to that, is that at some point you've got to say Wagyu needs to mean something, so when a consumer sees it, they have some level of expectation to how that's going to perform, and it's not something just for one company. It's something that it transcends all of us, right? It's part of everything that all of us are doing here. And so if one of us destroys it, we're not just hurting ourselves, right? We're hurting the whole industry. And so that would be my argument for some level of standard. Now maybe we say, maybe there's caveats, ways for them to label it and say there's some Wagyu influence in here, but it's not American Wagyu or whatever that is. But there needs to be some standard that we can give consumers, and it's probably not consumers so much as chefs and food service providers and those guys, retailers, give them that level of confidence that if it says Wagyu on it, it meets some minimum threshold. Does that make sense? I can't see her.
I think we need to remember today, where we're at. So, the live cattle spec today is that it just needs to be, a crossbred animal or better, right? So to be able to put Wagyu on your label, that is what the Wagyu spec is. We're also in the same breath as far as, having a minimum quality grade standard with these voluntary programs like the Authentic Wagyu program. I personally think there definitely has to be a minimum threshold, and I was clear on that in my decision when I voted on it, when I was on the board, when they made that decision, because there has to be a clear line of delineation in creating an experience for the consumer, because they have to be able to be willing to continue to buy Wagyu. So, if someone's signing up for a program, there has to be a minimum quality grade standard. So yeah, that's my personal opinion.
I could not agree more. We see it in food service on a regular basis. We run into a chef that says, "Oh, it's Wagyu. It's not as great as you guys purport it to be." And most of the time, that person is a person that's had a really bad experience. I'm not going to call out a retailer or anything like that, but there are retailers that have Wagyu beef in their butcher case at the supermarket, and there are a lot of individuals that every Friday or every Saturday, once a week, they go to that case and they go pick a prime ribeye or a prime strip, and that's something they look forward to every single week. And oftentimes you can see Wagyu right next to that prime or really nice choice in the case. And a lot of these consumers, they don't know what makes Wagyu so special. They don't understand that it's even marbling sometimes that separates a select choice prime predominantly. But they do know when they go into that case and they see Wagyu right next to that prime strip or prime ribeye that they go in there every Friday or every Saturday that they've been looking forward to all week. They see that Wagyu next to that prime and they say, "You know what? I'm going to try that. It's an extra $10, $15, maybe even $20 a pound more. I'm going to splurge this week a little bit extra." That person may not know why Wagyu is better, but they do know it's supposed to be better. And they invest that extra little bit of hard-earned cash on that Wagyu steak. They take it home. And a lot of these guys, they have a bad experience because they got a product that was actually much less marbled than what's in the prime case. I've seen that at multiple retailers walking through. Of course, I'm always going to go by the meat case and take a real close look at what's in there. And that hurts us as a breed. That consumer is then burned. They've had a bad experience with Wagyu, and that stays with a lot of consumers, whether they be food service professionals or retail customers.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also think too, like now more than ever is a time to be really considerate about your quality. Just because the cost of beef as a category today is so high, just conventional beef is, it is not that much more of a dollar spend to upgrade, and the consumer is still buying beef. So, that extra spend doesn't feel it because they were already committed to buying the beef anyways, right? So you want to be able to have that elevated eating experience because that would be, an opportunity to convert that consumer to a Wagyu eater. So, those who are buying beef and continue to buy beef, they're beef buyers. So, now as a time in kind of where we are in the cattle cycle, this is the time to make sure that they have a great eating experience.
Very well said. We are out of time. Do you guys have any last words, comments? Oh, thank you guys. Yeah, give them a round of applause. There's a ton of knowledge up here.